Yes, I'm still here, Hollywood. Coming up on today's episode.
There I was at the table read, and Seinfeld being the most disorganized show on television, they only had half the script written. I picked up the script and I walked away to an area that was secure. I called my manager and I said, "This is the #1 show on television?" I said, "It's not funny."
What about Julia Louis-Dreyfus?
Smart, funny, and easily the greatest. You have to go back to Lucille Ball to remember the embodiment of a better physical comedian. She would go down with the ship to get the laugh.
Over the top is a term that is often used as a kind of a slam to someone's personality. But in Hollywood, playing a role over the top can make you stand out. And if you're lucky, it could land you an iconic character part in one of the biggest shows in television history. This is Still Here Hollywood. I'm Steve Kmetko. Join me with today's guest, Elaine's boss, J. Peterman, on Seinfeld, actor John O'Hurley. If you'd like to be more involved with us at Still Here Hollywood, you definitely can. Just visit patreon.com/stillherehollywood. You can support us for as little as $3 a month. You can get our episodes a day before they post anywhere else. You can see what guests will be coming up and submit questions for them. You can even tell us what stars you want us to have on as guests. You'll see what goes on before and after the episode, plus exclusive behind-the-scenes info, pics, video, and more. Again, that's patreon.com/stillherehollywood. John, were you impacted by the fires at all?
You know, I was lucky enough to have dodged a bullet, and we moved out from Beverly Hills to the Westlake, Thousand Oaks area, and which is awrought with brush and trees. But we also are lucky enough to have Westlake, Lake Sherwood, a lot of water around us. So anytime anything seems to spout up, they're able to knock it down fairly quickly. So we were lucky. We dodged the big bullet that not a lot of people did.
How has it impacted the city, do you think?
Well, I think it's been an emotional attack on the city. The places that people used to think, well, I'm living in Malibu on the ocean. What could possibly happen on that side of PCH? Sure enough, they went down like dominoes, and then all the way up in the hills took out what was part of the rich architectural history of Los Angeles, and probably never to be replaced again, because you can't build the class and the style of architecture that was there historically. I mean, some of those homes go back to the 20s and the 30s, and were really part of the grand gift of architecture, and represented some of the greatest building achievements of some of the great minds in the entertainment industry. They laid it over into the homes that they lived in as well.
I was coming in yesterday from Chicago, and I asked the driver if he would go through El Pollo Loco, because we don't have any in Chicago, and I love El Pollo Loco. Lived on it when I was out here.
You wine list or no?
No.
No, you bypassed that. No.
I bypassed that. But there were people in the El Pollo Loco yesterday who were talking to each other and saying things like, God bless Los Angeles. I don't know how we got through that, and things of that nature. And I thought, oh, and this is a chicken joint.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it was the number of people that have been affected by this, and not just intrinsically affected because they lost their house, but they have all of the things, the ancillary things that went along with it. The gardening services. Well, everybody had a gardening service out there. They no longer have those contracts. There's employees that are out of jobs. All of the support services, the groceries, the small businesses, they're all gone. And it will be a long time before they come back. And, you realize that, yes, okay, maybe I have my lot, I've lost my home, but do I really want to build in an area where I'm going to be watching building for the next 10 or 15 years? And you start to scratch your head and say, do I want to do this?
Right.
And if you're older, like I am, you say, how many houses do I have left in me? And You know, you got a lot of decisions to make with a calamity that is this large and all-encompassing.
Okay, let's go back to career stuff.
What a cheery beginning, huh?
Well, no, you can't. It's like the elephant in the room. You can't really, go on without it.
And it's had such an impact on the industry as well.
It's had an impact on me sitting at home in Chicago and watching it on TV. It was nonstop on every channel, it seemed.
Yeah.
And I didn't even live here. We didn't live here, but everybody was asking, do you see things you recognize? Yes, I do.
Not
I lived
anymore.
here for 30 years.
Not
Come
anymore.
on.
Yeah.
Okay, let me ask you, how, first of all, did the job on Seinfeld ever come about?
Well, it was kind of a very strange, perfect storm. I was doing a sitcom on ABC called A Whole New Ball Game, which was put up by the producers of then the series Coach, which you think back, you'll remember, it was a very successful series with Craig T. Nelson.
Right.
And they wanted to pair up a series that they could move along with Coach, and if they had to move it around, they'd take that series with them. So they would lock up a full hour of television programming. Well, they ended up moving the show, Coach around a little bit, moved our show around a little bit, and we never found an audience. So halfway through the season, they called and said, don't bother coming to work, we've canceled the show, and which is the way ABC and all the other networks do it. And so I went out to dinner that night with my manager, crying in my beer, trying to take the cancellation as personally as I possibly could. And Larry David's office called and said, we heard John's show got canceled, and we have this guest star on the show this week. I don't know if he'd like to do it, but it's a really funny, weird character that he could have a lot of fun chewing up and spitting out with the scenery. So I said to my manager, I said, tell him thank you, but no. And I said, I'm licking my wounds over the cancellation of the series today. And I said, I don't really want to go guest star on somebody else's show. And in truth, I had never really watched Seinfeld, even though at the time it was the #1 show. Well, come to find out, the following morning, I get a call at about 10 o'clock, and my manager says to me, get out of bed. I never called last night. They're waiting for you over there in an hour. So I ended up going over there, and there I was at the table read, and Seinfeld being the most disorganized show on television, they only had half the script written. And sure enough, by the end of the week and through the taping, Elaine was working for the J. Peterman Company, and I had a job. Everybody looked at me and they said, well, welcome to the cast. But it's funny, I learned a lot, because the second I finished that table read, I picked up the script and I walked away to an area that was secure. I called my manager and I said, this is the #1 show on television? I said, it's not funny. I said, it's not funny. Now, what I didn't know, and it took me a while to learn, was that it wasn't Golden Girls funny. It wasn't a show that your job was to set a joke up and deliver a punchline. Set the joke up and deliver a punchline. It wasn't the way it was. Seinfeld was funny because everybody played their scenes like it was Streetcar Named Desire. Everybody was so passionate and it was like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? It was like Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor going at each other tooth and nail. That's what made the scene funny. If you played it for the drama, it was funny as the comedy. And that's something that not a lot of people realized, and it took me a while to realize it as well, that I had to play it as a drama. And that included, the intensity of J. Peterman for his, miswanderings around the world and his river markets that he was always traveling to and in search of an elusive swatch of corduroy and what have you. But I had to learn a new style of comedy, and that's what made Seinfeld different.
Tell me about your voice.
It's all mine. The irony to my voice is that mine was the last one to change in high school. I had a little voice that was like this all the way up to I was 16 years old, the fall of being 16 years old. I still had a little squeaky voice. And then all of a sudden, one day, it started to drop. And it was the happiest day of my life because it paralleled a time in entertainment when music was owned by the great DJs. The record companies didn't own music. The groups didn't own their music. It was the radio, it was the DJs on the radio station. They determined what would go on the airways. And they had these incredible, mellifluous voices and personalities. You had, people like Dick Robinson, and so my voice is changing. At the same time, I'm hearing all of these incredible voices on the radio, which is really only the mechanism that we had to really listen to popular music. And I realized that the human voice is an instrument and that it can be played. And then you cut to some years after that, and I was in college, and I was majoring in theater and minoring in opera. And then I realized, and I will underscore again, that the voice is an instrument. And if you sustain it, it's music, it's tone. If you don't sustain the tone, it's talking. So really, it was that's a long answer to your question of, tell me about your voice.
Well, I'm just curious because of what I've read online is that it's your voice that gets you a lot of your jobs.
It does indeed. And I do a lot of voiceovers. I do a lot of cartoons. And they're mostly very urbane characters because I do happen to kind of have cornered the market on a style, I suppose, of speaking. I don't differentiate too much from that, but it's but on the other hand, if you were to go back into the 40s and the 50s, you would find people having my voice was pretty much commonplace because they came from the Broadway stage, they came from radio, they came from places where the voice really was the mechanism by which you communicated. You put a microphone in somebody on stage right now that is coming from any one of the sitcoms or any one of the movies you can't hear them. They have no voice. They've never learned to develop their voice. And so that's probably why I stick out, is because I took the time to learn.
Have people complimented you on your voice?
I have received some very nice compliments on my voice, and I cherish those. I really do, because again, it's like someone say, "Congratulations, you learned how to master your instrument." Not your domain, but you're interested. That was
master of your domain.
That was a whole different thing, a whole different episode.
Tell me some of the characters you've voiced. You've done a lot of animated work, right?
I have. There's about 15 cartoons that I've done. Some of them I remember, some of them I don't. And the reason being is when you go into a studio and you record an animated character, they may not have that the cell illustrations and what have you done for another year. So you completely forget that you did that thing, and you'll just happen to watch and animate it. And you go, oh, there I am. That's me. But some of the more notable ones, King Neptune on SpongeBob, which is probably one of the largest shows, I think, with Nickelodeon and the enormous success that has been. And that's carried over into its sequel, which is called Patrick. So that character lives on. I had a wonderful experience on ABC's top show called Phineas and Ferb, which I think is it's kind of Seinfeld for kids. I just think it is one of the most imaginative and funny to the bone shows, and it has nothing to do whether I'm in it or not. It was just the magic of the music and the writing of the dialogue, the construct of the story. It was just brilliant. And then there were other things that I kind of look at and I go, oh, because I remember them from being a child. I am the Phantom Blot on Mickey Mouse. Phantom Blot being nothing more than this amorphous-shaped ink stain that can kind of morph himself into different figures. And that was kind of fun because it was something that was back from the late 1930s. And then Walter Bunny on Bugs Bunny. That was kind of fun to be part of that series as well. I was Mr. Slate on Fred Flintstone, which was kind of fun. one of the ones. So there've been a few that kind of stick up, and then, as I say, I'm Hades and Monster High, and there's a few popular ones now, but they don't have the history that draws me back into it.
Like a Bugs Bunny might have.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
John, how do you like working in a booth alone? You must do quite a bit of work alone, standing in a booth.
It is very lonely. But no, I actually prefer it.
Do you?
Sure, because the directors are so wonderful about knowing the story and presenting you with the context of what you do. That basically I'll just give them 3 takes on a particular line. That's all I need to do, and one of them is right. By what they're looking
One
for.
of them's bound to be right.
One of them is right. So I am literally, I can do an entire episode in 15 minutes, and I don't even really have to turn the car off out in the lot. Yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah, it is.
I don't know. It doesn't say much for your carbon footprint, but other than that, hey, tell me about. Once again, I'm going back and forth. I jump around a lot. Going back to Seinfeld for a second. What was it like working with Jerry Seinfeld?
Well, I only actually worked with Jerry in one particular episode. I was always with either George or Elaine, and sometimes Kramer. But Jerry only one episode, and it was the night. It was in the Bosco episode when everybody is supposed to be having dinner with me. At the Chinese restaurant, and they all scoot out of there as they say, scoot out on an excuse built for one. And George was the only one left, and he ends up having dinner with me, which involves a phone call to which I understand my mother is at death's door, and George then becomes my mentor, my compatriot, and he's seeing me through the passage of my mother. And I later find out that he gave up his ATM code, Bosco, and that were, oddly enough, my mother's final words, to which I understood that George killed my mother.
It's a shame. That's a startling thing
So
to find out.
But that doesn't mean Jerry wasn't there. Jerry was an active part of the show, and he was an active part of all the scenes that I was in. And I was there for some, I guess, 5 seasons, 4 or 5, anyway, But Jerry always was such an interesting character because unless you knew who he was, he looked like a tourist. He would have his hands in his pockets, or he'd be holding a bowl of cereal from craft services and just kind of sitting in the background and laughing along. And he was so nondescript and very endemic to his suburban upbringing, I guess, out in Long Island there. He just kind of dressed the part, looked the part, acted the part, always a gentleman, and one of the smarter people I've ever worked with.
Really?
Yeah, I wouldn't say one of the best actors, but he knew that. And he knew that he was the keel. Every comedy has to have a keel, so that becomes the interpretation of what is normal in that world of comedy. And so all of the lunacy can happen around it as long as you have your keel. And everyone had it. Cheers had it with Ted Danson, and it's like every good comedy has to have
Mary Tyler Moore show with Mary. She was like,
yep, everything could happen to her.
Yeah,
because she was the keel, exactly. And then the relationship with Ed Asner and Mary was very much a more surreal version was Peterman and Elaine.
We'll be back for more in a moment. What about Julia Louis-Dreyfus? I only encountered her from time to time on various red carpets at the Emmys,
Sure.
but she was always hysterical. She was so bright. She always looked great.
Smart, funny, and easily the greatest. You have to go back to Lucille Ball to remember the embodiment of a better physical comedienne, and that's ENNE, I guess, is appropriate. But she would go down with the ship to get the laugh, as evidenced by that inane Elaine dance that she did.
Which is still on today
still
for
on
commercials and.
I will do appearances now at baseball stadiums on their Seinfeld nights, and sure enough, they'll have a dozen or 2 dozen people out there in the field all doing the Elaine dance, and the crowd has to applaud for their
favorite.
Their favorites, and Yeah, she is, but just a lovely person and funny as can be, married to a great guy, and good people. Sadly, they, I think, lost their home as well in
I think I read
Palisades,
that.
Yeah.
The last time I interviewed her, she came to the Emmys with comedian.
Wanda Sykes.
That's it.
I'm sorry,
the two of them came up.
I'm sorry, we needed that in the form of a question. Who was Wanda Sykes?
And the two of them together just destroyed us, those of us who were working the line. The two of them got together. It was like they'd been together forever and ever, playing off each other.
Yep.
Just very, very
Yep,
funny.
you have to go back to Veep to find Elaine actually saying a four-letter word. It's like rather, it just doesn't sound right coming out of her mouth, does it?
No. And Veep was another one. What is with her? She just seemed the New Adventures of old
Christine.
Seinfeld, Veep. It's like she has a Midas touch.
She does. She hits upon all wheels. Always. Well, she just plays one. I mean, she's a wonderfully engaging character. She really was.
And when she received an award for the Mark Twain Award at the Kennedy Center, she was hysterical, just doing her shtick, and had everybody going. Anyway, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
She
was the one that we had the toughest time completing a scene without
laughing.
Going into just.
That's why there's so many outtakes on the internet.
There are. Oh my goodness, there are more. It took us forever to shoot a show because the everybody. I mean, she would just look at me and go, and all I would have to do, and I would go, Elaine, that's it, and if she would just go
dissolve,
because it sounded so different.
So, John, tell me about how the whole dog show stuff came about.
Interesting. Speaking of doing different things. Yes, I put my finger through the belt loops of some interesting franchises between Seinfeld and Dancing with the Stars and
Family Feud,
and To Tell the Truth. And I've been really lucky to be surrounded by success, and I've been really lucky to be able to sit in the same room as those people. But the dog show came about in a funny way. The head of NBC Sports, back in 2002, took home a copy of Best in Show, the movie that Christopher Guest made famous, the parody of the Westminster Dog Show. He watched it twice that weekend and was in hysterics. So John Miller, head of NBC Sports, comes into the morning meeting at NBC on Monday and says, I know what we're going to do with that 2-hour slot between the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade and football. We're going to do a dog show. Well, they about laughed him out of the office. But by the end of the day, he had licensed from the Kennel Club of Philadelphia the National Dog Show, one of their shows, and had contacted Purina as our presenting sponsor. And then Tuesday morning called me in L.A., and I answered the phone, and I said hello, and it was him, and he said, woof, woof. And that's how it all started. And that was 23 years ago. And normally I kill shows. They don't stay on the air that long with me. It's been 23 years. We go into year number 24. Hopefully we'll get to 25. But we have, to its fairness, it's the number 2 next to the Super Bowl, the number 1 show on television. We get an audience of anywhere from 25 to 30 million people a year, and it's bewildering to us that our audience is actually growing at a time when television audiences are shrinking on individual viewing platforms. So it's just amazing to us that we have found something that is the perfect piece of programming, and God bless us, we'll be blessed with permanence.
Well, dogs aren't about to go
No, they
away
really aren't.
soon.
And I'll tell you, and I always say, if you're sitting there with a remote and you're just kind of doing this, and you're going around on Thanksgiving Day, and all of a sudden you see a set of puppy dog eyes, we own you.
Yes, hard to turn away. What kind of dogs do you have?
Well, I have two rescues now. I've had many purebreds during the years. I've always had a dog. My first, we were talking earlier about dachshunds, and you happened to have a mini dachshund, I believe, and
Buddy.
That was I had Taffy. Taffy was a short-haired dachshund. That was my first dog when I was 4 years old, and she was my little buddy.
And now?
And now I have the two rescue dogs.
And you don't know what they are.
We have
23andMe.
Not a clue.
Could not
I did the
tell you.
23andMe, and as I joke, Mommy swam out to meet the Navy ship because there are so many different breeds tucked in there that she could. I mean, Andy Kaufman, I think, was in there as well. I think he was one of the things that surfaced.
Whoa. Have you had any bad experiences doing the dog show at all?
Not bad experience. Dogs are dogs.
Dogs are
Remember,
dogs.
and these are, we have on any given year in Philadelphia, which is where we film the National Dog Show, just before Thanksgiving, and we air it on Thanksgiving. So we have 2,000 of the best dogs, and we have over 200 different breeds. These dogs are so exceptionally well trained that everything you can possibly think of, and most notably their socialization, their ability to be around 2,000 other dogs, and no dog fights, no barking, no nothing. They all basically
mind their own business.
They mind their own business, and they know what they're there for. However, dogs are dogs, and these are just our dogs, and they do the same thing. They sit on the couch, and occasionally they drink the toilet water, and it's like you can't help that they are dogs. So, one year, they brought the best in show, which are the final 7 dogs rather, brought into the ring, and they have been winning all day long in the process of elimination groupings. So the top 7 dogs are in the ring. They all do their walk or run around the ring. And just as the Great Dane, which is one of the largest dogs on this planet Earth, comes past the NBC booth, it stops. It's a black and white dog. I remember it distinctly. It stops, and it just looks over its right shoulder at me, then proceeds to squat down and leave what I would regard as an editorial comment on my performance that had to be that large. And so the show stops in its tracks because we have to bring out what is the hazmat team with the shovels that would accommodate an elephant's refuse, and they had to stop the show, disinfect the rug and everything so that every dog didn't stop and smell, as they are known to do. But so it was, oh my goodness, yeah. So I think that was really, we've had a couple of runners where all of a sudden the handler let go of the dog and the dog just took off in the ring, and it's like, we got a runner. We got a runner.
It reminds me of that joke about the guy who cleans up after the elephants in the circus parade. And somebody says, why don't you quit your job? And he said, what, and give up show business? Same kind of thing. It's got to be a lot of fun.
It is. It's a wonderful show, and everybody's happy. It's if you can imagine the joy that if we had a dog in this room right now, at one point we'd all be looking at the dog. And just dogs hold a fascination to us, both with their docility and their innocence, but also their loyalty to us. I mean, there's so many dogs have very few negative qualities to them. They teach us so many things. I've actually written 3 books on the subject of dogs, and basically the premise of what I write about is that dogs teach us everything that we need to know in life. It's kind of like everything I needed to learn in high school, I learned, or everything I needed to learn in life, I learned in kindergarten. It has that same feeling of that dogs teach us so many wonderful life lessons. And but if you were to have a dog here, we'd all be looking at that dog because they just represent just the state of goodness.
I used to have a Yorkie named Stella,
Oh.
and I would take her to work with me at E, and she would lay down on my desk and sleep. She was only like 4 pounds.
Oh, of course, yes.
So I'd bring her in every once in a while because everybody relaxed automatically when they'd come in. Can we touch? Can we pet Stella? Sure, you can. And I used to take her downstairs to the mail department because that's the only scale I could find to weigh her on that she'd register.
Yeah.
So that was great fun. I think dogs should be allowed more public places.
Well, it is happening, and there's been a very strong movement in the country, and there are actually very few places, especially in New York City now, where you can go where a dog isn't allowed. I have, in fact, they don't even ask anymore. Or why, do you have a service, your credentials for that as a service? They don't even ask anymore. They just assume. Dogs are all over the place. I mean, New York is the greatest dog city in America. So if it happens there, it pretty much happens anywhere.
Tell me about, again, I was kind of surprised to read this, that you are now, the character you play was J. Peterman, which was connected to the catalog company J. Peterman.
The real jpeterman.com. Yeah.
And you now, and have for some time, own a percentage of it, don't you?
I do. It was a very odd story. John Peterman, the owner of the J. Peterman Company, arrived at work one morning, and his employees said, "You were on Seinfeld last night." And he said, "No, I was on a plane last night." And they said, "No, you were one of the characters on Seinfeld last night." And he went, "What?" Well, immediately if you are slightly litigious, your ears go up, and it's the first call is to your lawyers. But he thought about it, and he ended up talking to the people at Seinfeld and just said, "Well, we're going to do this once just because we thought it was an unusual character. The catalog is so unusual. It is the most unusual catalog you'll ever read, jpeterman.com, if you want to find something like that." The show what we parodied on Seinfeld, it's about it's a Hemingway novel, a bit of copy written about climbing K2 in your Oxford button-down. And it's about one-of-a-kind romantic wear, and it's really a fascinating piece of literature and capitalism. It's just beautiful merchandise, and I just found it. So anyway, long story short, he and I, because of over the years of being on Seinfeld, he and I became joined at the wrist and ankles, and we became very good friends. Well, about a year and a half after Seinfeld ended, he was about to IPO the company, and everything went belly up on him, and that's the way things happen in that world. And he went down in about 2 weeks. He didn't even see it coming. So he called me back about a year later and said, "I've got the intellectual property back. Would you like to write me a really, really large check, and we'll put the company back together again under our parallel strengths?" So I wrote a really, really large check, and since 2000, I have been part owner of the J. Peterman catalog, and it still has been the greatest act of identity theft ever, and I'm not giving it back. And we will walk down, I'm on the board, and he and I will walk down Madison Avenue on our way to lunch and a bottle of wine. We always have to have our wine. And we'll end up going to this Italian restaurant. We'll be walking down Madison, and sure enough, some cop car will roll down a window and scream, "Hey, Peterman!" And they're not talking to him. They're talking to me. Now, isn't that bizarre?
It is bizarre.
It is what Marshall McLuhan used to say: the message and the medium will eventually become indistinguishable. And I am the greatest example of that, because I am Peterman, he is not. And all he did was just run a successful clothing catalog company, and for the rest of his life, he will have lost his identity. It's amazing when you think about it.
In exchange for...
Yeah. Well, a success, keeping the company going,
Yeah.
I suppose, the perpetuity of the company. Yeah.
You sing, you act on stage, on television, in film. You do voices. I was surprised to see all that. What was you did a one-man show called A Man with Standards.
A Man with Standards.
I'm
touring that right now around, actually, it's internationally too. I toured it overseas as well.
And it's all about stories you've accumulated in your life in
They're
show
the
business.
stories of my life, but it's framed around growing up in the 50s and the 60s, around the music of the standards, we called them, the music of Mancini, Sinatra, Moon River, all of that style of music. And I also quip that I was lucky enough to grow up in a time around people who had standards. We called them gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen. And I talk about, which brings in my parents a lot and the way that I grew up, and the very funny stories of my life, because I was just just another bozo on the bus. And I did some very strange things, but I always knew that I was going to be an actor. So for me, it was always just about sitting back and just trying to connect the dots until my time came.
And it came.
And it did. But not without, a lot of kicking and screaming. But yeah, I went to New York in 1981. It took me 48 hours to get my first show. Longest 48 hours of my life, I'll tell you. But and I never looked back. And I've been blessed with being able to work every day ever since.
One of the things you say in your show is the biggest mistake of your show business career was singing Sinatra to Sinatra.
Yeah, this is one of the it's truly one of the funniest stories because of the height of the circumstances. Sinatra had an enormous influence on my life. I had a kid, my best friend in high school, tell me that I had the worst voice he'd ever heard, and I shouldn't sing. And so, because he was doing this for my own good, you don't say that to somebody unless you're really doing them a favor.
Mm-hmm.
I shut up, and I didn't sing at all for many, many years, but it was Sinatra in college that got me to sing again, not him personally, but it was his music that got me to sing again when he brought out his album Old Blue Eyes is Back in 72 or 3, I think it was, 73. And so you can imagine the influence he had on my life. Well, cut to the mid-'80s when I'm now in New York and I've become kind of Mr. Daytime Television. I was on just about every show you could possibly do, and I was the original Twin Brothers on daytime, and I was on the #1 show, Young and the Restless, for a while. And so I really developed a niche in that style. Well, lo and behold, in the mailbox one day I get an invitation to none other than the Frank Sinatra Celebrity Golf Tournament. And nobody could have been more.
That'll make the hair on the back of your neck stand up.
It sure did. And
wow.
I rolled up my tuxedo, stuck it under my arm, and I went out to Palm Springs to the gala out there. And I was by myself, and I knew I was going to see His Hisness himself. So he came in, and I just was mesmerized by the power and the command and the silence that he had. And I said to myself, I learned more about being an actor by watching him walk across the room than I ever learned anywhere in any portion of my acting career. Well, what I didn't realize is that we were all supposed to go back to Sinatra's house afterwards and entertain Frank. Everybody, all the celebrities, were supposed to go back. So Robert Goulet is there. He sings 45 minutes of the best ballads he's ever belted out. Buddy Hackett was there, insulting with the most obscene material I've ever heard in my life. Don Rickles insulted 2 entire zip codes. Well, it got to be about 2 in the morning, and people were kind of still there. There was still about 100 hangers-on at his house, and Frank was sitting by the piano, and he's probably on his 43rd scotch by the time I was. His pianist does this to me, because I'm the last one, easily. About 2 in the morning. And I said, oh, no. And at this point, I want to climb into my glass of Chardonnay. And I went over to him, and he says, what are you doing? So I leaned over, and I told him what I was going to do. And he looked back at me as though I had just licked his ear. And he says, okay. And he sat down and started playing. And I proceeded to do the stupidest thing I have ever done in my career. I sang Sinatra to Sinatra. And when he finished, there was absolutely not a sound in the room. There was absolute silence, and they knew I had broken the rule. And Sinatra is sitting there with his drink, and he is just running his fingers over the edge like this. And everybody's waiting for what he's going to say. And he looks up and he says, that was the song that Joe Raposo wrote for me to sing to my wife. Were you singing to my wife? I said, no, sir, I wasn't. I'm sorry. And I don't know what I said, but I grabbed my Chardonnay and I began to walk back to the wall that I had been holding up. And as I pass him, he reaches over, touches me like right there in a spot that I have not washed since. And he says, you sounded good. You sounded good. That was it. That's all I ever needed. I don't know if anybody else said anything that night, because as I stood back on that wall, I raised my glass and I thought to myself, somewhere in this world, that guy, Martin the Italian, had just dropped dead. True story.
What a great story.
It's a great one. And because he had such an influence on me, and I still do. You know, it's funny, in my one-man show, I do the song "You Will Be My Music," which is the song that Raposo wrote for him to sing to his wife. And it's one of the greatest pieces that he ever sang. I think it's one of the best written pieces. But yeah, he had an enormous influence on my life and continues to this day.
I think he had an enormous influence on a lot of people's lives. I saw him in concert with Count Basie, Ella Fitzgerald, Liza Minnelli, Sammy Davis.
There wasn't a better stylist than him.
And we'll be right back. Do you think that role in Seinfeld, do you think that affected your casting in any other parts, positively or negatively?
Probably.
Are there things that you would have liked to have done that somehow or another just haven't come through yet?
Well, I've had a pretty blessed career, I tell you. I've done, for 15 years I have done Billy Flynn and the musical Chicago on Broadway, over 2,000 performances. I've done over almost 2,000 performances of King Arthur and Monty Python's Spamalot, and then I did the El Gallo in the Fantastics on Broadway. So I've had a pretty nice theatrical career. Yes, it probably salted the castings, I would say, on television, because I think people kind of remembered. It's kind of like everybody remembers Newman as Newman, and you don't want to bring that character into your show. You want something new and sparky. So it might have. I'll never know, because they'll never tell you. It's like they'll never tell you the jobs that you don't get, that you weren't offered. You only know the ones you got. But I've worked, every day since Seinfeld. So in one capacity I've been really blessed. I've never had a difficulty being employed, and that was really my goal when I went to New York in 1981.
Well, that's the definition of a working actor.
It was to be a working actor. It's all I wanted to be. In fact, I would have been very happy just going to a repertory company like, the Goodman Theater or the Hartford Stage or someplace, and just been part of the repertory company and earn my $400 or $500 a week. And I mean, that to me would have been that's all I ever wanted, because at the age of 3, when these large people were standing over me asking me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I recall still soiling diapers at the rate of 3 a day, and I didn't know if I had a concrete career example. But that's when I decided that I would point to the black and white television in the corner of the room, and I would say, well, I am an actor, so that's what I'm going to be. And so for me, it was always about connecting the dots.
What do you have lined up right now?
Something very unusual, actually. I just signed to do a new movie. I've done 3 this year already. I've been really.
Hey, it's only February.
I know. I just got a new one yesterday, but I'm doing something different. Patrick Warburton, who played Putty on the show, we had this crazy idea over too many beers one night, and I said we should really do something together, because we never did anything together on the show, and yet we're such close friends, and yet we both have a different but pronounced sense of humor. I said we should do a show together. And I thought that, Steve Martin and Marty Short are doing a kind of a two-man show. And so I said, so sure enough, in late March, the end of March, we are doing a two-man show. It's called An Evening with Putty and Peterman. And it says, and the subtext is crass and class. And it's already almost sold out, and we just went on
Really?
the docket about 4 days ago. So it's we're doing 3 different venues up there. It's going to be part of the Food and Comedy Festival they're having in Providence. Then we have 2 other theaters that we're doing some stuff in while we're out there as well. So it's going to be. So he and I will probably continue marching around the country with an evening with Putty and Peterman. It's a lot of fun because he takes one act, I take another, and we come back and do a Q&A.
That sounds like great fun.
Yeah.
I mean, Martin Short and Steve Martin have made it work so well for them.
Yep.
And
Well, the
plus-
nice thing about, Patrick and I are just so different. He just, he is, as he said, he says, I'm crass and you're class. And it's just, it's a perfect evening of entertainment.
The billing works to your advantage.
It sure does.
Did you come up with the personality of Peterman, or was it written that way?
Oh no, that was me. That was me. I just knew. I had read. They gave me the clothing catalog to read, and they said we just want him to sound the way the catalog is written, as though this Hemingway dialogue is coming out of, it's just tripping off his tongue, and that this is the way he speaks, and so. It was an easy thing for me to do because as I read through the catalog and I said, yes, it was Hemingway, but it sounded like a bit of a 40s radio drama combined with a bit of a bad Charles Kuralt. And then it gave, as the history of the character went on through the show, it gave the writers a chance to write not short form, but in long form. They could write monologues. Now, sadly, most of the monologues were cut from the show because the show, as I said, the most disorganized show, but always too long. So the first thing the editor would do is cut the Peterman monologue, and then they've got 2 more minutes to work with, and so. But there was a lot of stuff, and I'll give you an example of one monologue that was cut. It was when Rob Schneider was playing my hard of hearing assistant, and I thought that Elaine and Bob were having a little tete-a-tete on office time. And so I walk into her office and I slap down 2 tickets to the Karamazov circus playing Cupid, and I told her that she and Bob could knock off a little early to get ready. Well, she looked at me as though I had grown a second head, and she says, Bob? And I said, Elaine, don't worry. I, too, am no stranger to love on the clock. As a young lad, my father apprenticed me to a honey factory in Belize. The chief beekeeper was this horrible hag of a woman with gnarled teeth and a giant wart that she called a nose. Oh, she was not attractive, even by backward standards. But love is truly blind, Elaine. And as the days went on, working closer and closer together, that sweet smell of honey in the air, I knew I had to have that horrible creature. And I did. So you and Bob have a good time tonight. Right on the cutting room floor.
We've resurrected it today. Thank you.
They're fun. I enjoy them very much.
And I'm trying not to laugh too hard because I lost a tooth in front,
Oh, dear.
which is always attractive.
Oh, I've had that myself.
Oh, boy. So I enjoyed it.
That's why they have super glue.
That's what he used last time I was in there, and it didn't seem to hold long enough.
No, I pity. I understand. I've been through. I have been through. I empathize.
Smile.
Smirk.
Did I sit down with you at Fox once with Dorothy Lucy and Lauren Sanchez? Did we do a show? They used to have a little Hollywood show, and I was freelancing for them. And I think they asked me to sit in once, and I was pretty certain you were the guest.
Mm-hmm. Might have been during the Family Feud times.
May have been, yeah.
I did a lot of that during then.
Boy, that show has lasted and lasted and lasted.
Hasn't it? Well, Steve did a wonderful job with it. He just took it. I had 5 seasons of it, and it was turning into a penis joke. And I didn't like that. And I got all the letters and saying, well, we can't show this, to our kids at 6 o'clock anymore. And I go, no, I don't. So contract came up. I was gone. They were ready to move the show to Florida, which I said perfect timing because that's where game shows go to die. And so it was a good separation of the ways. But Steve came in and really resurrected the show. And my hat's off to him. He's really given the show a sense of permanence that will go on.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a fun time. And I had some wonderful stories of it. I remember 2 guys that were standing at the face-off two easily college graduates now that turn into deer in the headlights. And the question was, name a classic film that begins with the letter C, to which you would say Casablanca.
Chicago was named Best Picture.
Yeah, exactly. Citizen Kane,
Citizen Kane,
Caddyshack.
right.
They were all up there on the board. Seabiscuit. I mean, you can't write that stuff. I mean, it was never always a source of entertainment to me. They always would give Grandma. They would always put her down in the 5th position, as though she was never going to get called on. It's like, I don't know why. So the question was, name something that you would do on a first date to make yourself seem more attractive. Now, you'd say, what would you say?
Haircut,
perfume, take a bath, change your clothes, whatever. I get all the way down to Grandma there. I grab her hand and I did my little kiss on her hand. And I said, okay, we're going to think back now, you and I. What would someone do on a first date to make themselves seem more attractive? And she says, stuff your pants with a vegetable?
Did she name the vegetable?
I think it was, one of the heads of lettuce in the produce section, I'd say.
God, that was funny.
Isn't it funny? Yeah. Stuff your pants with a vegetable.
Hey, is it true you won't color your hair?
I never have. I did it once because it was a parody that we were doing of like a 40s drama. So I did it just to show them that I could, because the character was significantly younger. So I did it just that once. But no, I've never dyed my hair.
Have people asked you to?
No, I did. No, they never did. And I'll tell you a very funny story, because I did mention to you that back in my soap opera days, I was the first twin brothers on daytime television, preceding David Canary, who did it for many years on All My Children. Mm-hmm. But I was on the show Loving, which was also an ABC show, as a show that preceded All My Children. And I became the first two twin brothers. Well, to be a twin brother, you have to have a body double. So they had to go search New York of the extras and find somebody that was my size, and I had black hair back then, just little wisps of gray. But essentially dark hair. So they had to find somebody my size and somebody with my hair coloring, and so they could shoot over the shoulder. Well, they found a guy who was a bouncer down at the Limelight nightclub, the old church down on 19th and Madison, I think, and he became my body double. The only problem was he talked like this. And everything was like this, and I said, "Oh my God!" And so he was doing all of my other lines, the twin brothers lines, while I was doing the other brothers lines, and it drove me absolutely nuts because I'm a urbane type of character, and I'm listening to this bastardization of what I'm supposed to be saying, and I couldn't. It took me so far out of the character. I said to the producer, "Tell him to shut up, please. I can't." I said, "Be polite." And he's a nice guy. I said, "Don't hurt his feelings, but tell him to shut up. Don't let him talk. I'll just figure the spacing out myself." And so that's the way we ended up doing. So he never bothered opening his mouth. But when he finished, he would say, "Are they finished with me?" I said, "Yes, I think they are. They're all set. You can head back to your dressing room." He says, "Okay, good. He says, I'm kind of in the middle of my play right now." I said, "What?" He says, I'm writing a play about my life. I said, well, good for you. It was Chaz Palminteri.
Really?
He was my body double all those years, and he wrote Bronx Tale in the dressing room while he was my body double for Loving. Isn't that funny?
Should have hit him up for a part.
And to this day, I'll see him across the room, and it's like you go, who knew?
Who knew?
We don't look that much like each other anymore. So we kind of took a year off.
He has a nose that goes like this.
Well, it's just through years of conditioning.
Yeah. Thank you, John.
Great to be with you.
For coming in. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Very nice of you to do this.
Absolutely. A lot of fun.
Still Here Hollywood is a production of the Still Here Network. All things technical run by Justin Zangerly. Theme music by Brian Sanashin. And executive producer is Jim Lichtenstein.